Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, and welcome this morning to our panel session. It's wonderful to see such a large crowd. It's always a concern when you've got a session booked for the first session on the Friday morning after the evening before. But I'm pleased to see that, because I believe that this session will offer to the conference and to you who are here an opportunity to kind of just take thinking to another level and draw in hopefully the threads of the discussions, the ideas, the interactions that you've been having so far. And we're privileged to have on the stage here today 4 people who represent quite a diversity of background and interests, but all of whom in their own ways have really illustrated through what they do, as much as what they say, a vision for what being educated in the 21st century might be like. So that's why we've invited them along. And in that diversity, of course, we'll get difference, and in that difference, we'll get some good conversation going. So I've got a pattern for what we're going to do this morning. I'm going to ask each of our panelists in a moment to introduce themselves and to kind of give us a contextual point of reference, so that for those of you who don't know them, then we've got an anchoring point for our conversation. And then we're going to come back, and I'm going to give each of them just 5 minutes to give us an expression of what they think it will mean to be educated by the middle of this century. And then we'll come into the latter part, the real substance, where we want to make it quite controversial, if you like, and conversational. And there will be potentially opportunities, although it's going to be a little awkward to manage, maybe for some questions from the floor. But I guess the point, the reason that we put this panel session in here is throughout the conference, and it's been happening over years of ULearn, that whole idea of why keeps emerging. You know, we hear it's all about change. We need to be doing this. We need to have more technology. But we have to ask why. We have to come back to that centerpiece. And this question that we've posed this morning is deliberately provocative, I think, around the question of why. You could take it out to say, why school? Why are we continuing to do what we are? Why do we need to even continue to gather kids into one place and educate them and so forth? But it looks beyond that to actually ask, what does it mean to be educated in the middle of the century? So without further ado, our distinguished panellists, I'll just introduce by name, because you've probably seen and heard much of Marianne Malmstrom presenting workshops and things through the conference, and is our international visitor, and very pleased to have Marianne on the panel. Thank you. Barbara Cavanagh, principal at Albany Senior High School. I'll let her introduce more of that. Pam Hook, who tells me she left her humour basket at the door today, but I don't believe that for a second. Be well known to many of us. And of course, the esteemed Russell at the end, principal at Point England School, and we'll be hearing a little bit more about his work from our keynote speaker later in the morning, but he can give you the inside goss today. So that's my introduction of their names, but perhaps we start here with Marianne. Just introduce yourself a little bit in terms of what you bring to this panel.
Thank you, Derek, and thank you for having me at ULearn. It is an immense honor. I am a teacher for the last 25 years. I know it's hard to believe. I've been at the same school, an independent primary school on the East Coast, New Jersey. And recently, in the last 10 years, we added what we call an intermediate school. When we added the intermediate school, I was pulled technology, and suddenly I was the technology teacher with no map or no idea how to go forward, and really started looking at the students as inspiration for figuring out that direction. Last year I was lucky enough to come to your beautiful country and visited Hobsonville Point School and then several more schools down south, and learned about your national curriculum and was blown away. I've been told throughout the last 10 years, as I've developed programming, that what I do is wonderful, but not scalable, so I should stop. And in New Zealand, I see schools that are doing that. And just willing to say we don't have the answers, but we've got to try, and we're willing to try. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm going to be spending about 6 weeks traveling your beautiful country and visiting schools and learning as much as I can about the incredible things you're doing here. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Marianne.
Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou, no te kura mātua o Albany. I'm Barbara Cavanagh and I'm the Foundation Principal at Albany Senior High School. I've also been Principal and very proud to have been, and privileged actually, to have been Principal at Ngarawahia High School and Te Awamutu College. So this is my third principalship, and I guess coming to a new school and opening a new school meant that we've had to grapple with the very things that we're talking about today. You know, what do kids need? Are the traditions that we hold so dearly in schools, hold so dearly to our hearts, do they matter anymore? Are they purposeful anymore? Are we doing justice to our kids? About me, I think we're 8 years down the track now, and we're very proud of some of the things we do. And you can look up on internet and see what those things are. I guess I'm responding to what Derek said, introduce yourself. Well, when I introduce myself, I'm telling you that I'm a reader and I believe in reading, and I believe in reading books. Now, you can read them on Kindle if you like, but you can still need to read because you need to be informed. Ta-Nehisi Coates, he's a black man in the States, and he's writing a letter to his son. And I want to read to you just quickly today what he says about books, because it's what I think about books too. I needed more books, he says. At Howard University, one of the greatest collections of books could be found in the Moreland Research Centre. Moreland held archives, papers, collections, and virtually any book ever written by or about black people. For the most significant proportion of the time at Mecca, I followed a simple ritual. Now listen to this. This is what I want kids to do. I would walk into the Moreland reading room and fill out 3 call slips for 3 different works. I would take a seat at one of these long tables. I would draw out my pen and one of my black and white composition books. You can use your computer if you like. I would open the notes on my reading, new vocabulary words and sentences of my own invention. I would arrive in the morning and request 3 call slips at a time. The works of every writer I had ever heard of spoken in classrooms or out in the yard. I remember believing that the key to all life lay in articulating the precise difference between the black aesthetic and negritude. How specifically did Europe undevelop Africa? I must know. I live in Harlem. I had to inhale all the pages. Did you hear that? I had to inhale all the pages. Okay, that's me. Cheers.
Thanks, Barbara. Oh, hang on to that one, Barbara, if you don't mind. You can. Yeah. It should just be ready to go, I think. Pam, no? Yeah, it was all set. Yeah, it's magic.
Hi, I'm Pam Hook. I'm not a principal, and I'm not a teacher. I'm very interested in learning. I'm very interested in what an educated person might be today, and what an educated person might have been in the past, and what an educated person might have been in the future. My background, I've spent the last 13 years working with schools, looking at a particular model of learning that, in fact, if you like to put it very simply, allows students to know what it is to be educated, allows students to know what it is to think deeply. And I think it's an equity issue. I think to be an educated person, however we look at it, in whatever cultural context we look at it, I think to be educated is often to give some sort of advantage. So to be educated implies that there is such a thing as to be uneducated. And so there's some sort of privilege that goes with education. And I think all of us should be hungry to allow that privilege to be accessed by all students. So my work is really about letting students access ways of thinking and ways of knowing that will allow them to work with knowledge in such a way that they too will have choice and opportunity in their own lives. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam.
Te Mārie team, my name's Russell. I'm the principal of Point England School and the convener of the Manaia-Kalani cluster. I'm 57, and I've been at school since I was 5. I've never left school. But I've spent part of my life trying to learn how to leave school whilst at it. I think God's got a sense of humour because I didn't like school at all, and school didn't like me very much either. I think the reason I didn't like school when I was 5 is because Mum wasn't there. But after that, I had a series of adventures through school that didn't always make me feel an absolute blessing to the teachers or them to me. In fact, at some stage in my career, when I became a teacher, I realised that teachers were people, and that was a very useful thing for me to know now that I'm a principal. You guys are really flat, you know. Come on, I'm trying hard here. I've been blessed to grow up with Māori and Pasifika people all my life. Absolutely blessed. I've been forgiven a great deal because I'm a cultural nightmare most of the time, an anthropological one some of the time. I've put television in a village, and it was wonderful because we saw Play School on Sesame Street. In my journey with Māori and Pasifika and with school, I've always known that school was busted, so I haven't been concerned too much about tinkering with it because it was already broken, and so I thought we probably couldn't break it a whole lot more than it was for the people that I live and work amongst. So I've had a wonderful adventure of love, joy and happiness and forgiveness with people mighty, and to see if we could make a difference and get a better outcome. And it's been a wonderful adventure, a wonderful journey, and tons of fun, and I can recommend it to anybody. So, you know, if you really want to enjoy life, get into a Decile 1 community, go and live there, be forgiven for all your stupid blunders, and you have an incredible sense of belonging. So I love the community that I live and work in. I love the kids. We have the most gorgeous kids of anywhere. I mean, Sarah's are pretty cool, but ours are more gorgeous because they just are. I love them to bits, and I tell them all the time that I love them.
Thanks, team. So I think you'll pick up from there. There's a bit of passion sitting on the stage, and that's going to be exposed as as I invite each of our panellists to share with us just for 5 minutes what Pam sort of started off, and then this idea of addressing the question, what does it mean to be educated in the mid-21st century? And I when I put this theme together and was asked to do that, I sat there and I was looking at a photograph of my grandkids and thinking, you know, my parents back in the 50s had a vision for me and what it might be to be educated that is vastly, vastly different from when I look at my grandkids, hope and expect and have an apprehension for them in the future. And I guess that's what led that. So this isn't about predicting what the future will be. It's not necessarily focusing on the technology and the structures. It's going deeper to ask, what will it mean to be educated? And I'm going to come back to Pam, if you don't mind, to start the response, because you started that quite nicely in your intro, all right? And I'll just pick on the others as I feel fit.
Okay, Derek, could you read, in terms of your blurb where you started, what you said the drivers were for this conversation about?
Yeah, sure, it's a good point. So the abstract for this, I said, much has been written and a lot spoken about learning for the 21st century, much of which has been defined by references to changes in technology, learning spaces and society.
Thank you, that's enough.
That's it?
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you. It was the cue that was needed.
Yeah, I only got a few minutes, I can't let him go.
Yeah.
It's that much has been written in reference to technology, and then he has the absolute gall to say learning spaces are a driver for this conversation.
No, I didn't say they were a driver. I said much has been written about those.
Much has been written about them. Much. Let's stick up for ourselves. Much has been written. Changes in society. I'd like him just to scratch the first two out. I'd like him to talk about changes in society, because I think it's the changes in society that are doing this. The rest is ephemeral, it's pretend, it's marketing, it's consumerism, It's got nothing to do with what we're struggling with in schools. It's like the add-on, this will solve it, silver bullet kind of conversation on the side. So how is society really changing? And has that changed what it is to learn? And I'm going to suggest that perhaps it isn't. I'm going to suggest that perhaps knowledge has always been about knowing stuff, knowing about stuff, and knowing how to do stuff. And that hasn't changed. Way back when Derek was very young, his grandparents and his parents all want him to know about stuff, and they all want him to know how to do stuff. And then when you looked at those two levels, either functioning knowledge or declarative knowledge, however you want to label them, then they really wanted him to be able to do it at a level that had meaning. So they didn't want him to do it, if you like, at a surface level. They wanted him to be able to do it or know about it at a deep level or even a conceptual level. So there was always discriminators about, you've not done it very well, have another go at it. So way back then, we cared about the level of learning that was going on. We had some sort of measure about it. So that sort of way of thinking about it, there was surface, deep, and conceptual ways of knowing. Then anything that Derek learnt, or how to do, or what to do, didn't stay fixed like that. He interpreted it in terms of the cultural context he was working in. So if it was the 1950s, when he was learning stuff, he reimagined it in terms of the context of where he was in the 50s. But if it's 2015 at the moment, the content that comes in, the ideas and the things he's learning to do will be reimagined in the cultural context of now. And in both those times, 2050 and now, and some imaginable future, there will be some stuff that is advantageous to know. There will be some stuff that privileges and advantages some people. And usually the people who are already privileged and advantaged keep that information and keep those ways of doing for their own children. So usually this whole idea of what it is to be educated is closed shop. So what we've seen with society is increasing demands to let others in on that game plan. And the pressure of more access being wanted, not only more access to this, what it is to be educated, but also the pressure of the explosion of knowledge that's happened. If you can say now, the amount of knowledge that's there, it's created some interesting outcomes for us. I think a lot of what we're seeing happening in schools and happening with students is part of this wanting more access. So we're ending up with thousands of PhDs for whom we have no jobs. We're ending up with, it doesn't matter if you've got a bachelor's degree, you've got that access, that's not enough. You have to get something else. That's so the PhDs have got jobs to teach the people who are wanting the new stuff. You see, it circles around. No, but we're ending up in this kind of weird thing where we're giving certificates and credits and ways of measuring as people struggle to get access to the good stuff. And then there's a fallback from that. There's a disappointment and a railing at why aren't we in there. And so what we see then is very interesting in terms of what's happening. We see a rejection of authority, and we see a rejection of academia, and we move right back till we have someone like our own Mark Osborne sitting there telling us that what is really to be an educated person is to buy a Perla kit set and to run an iron over the top and make an American Icon Oreo that you can wrap a piece of an earbud around, when in fact if you wanted to control your earbud, an educated person wouldn't worry about any of that. They would just wrap their wire around a piece of toilet roll holder and it would be safe, right? It would be fine. We wouldn't need the American that might allow us access to something that gave us some choices. So I'm all for deep learning about how to do stuff and deep learning about how to know about stuff, and forget about the sense of we are all educational punks, we are all anarchists, we are all stepping out there and breaking and disrupting stuff. Recognize that we've never lived in a world where expertise has more advantaged people. where we need to know about real, deep, disciplinary knowledge to advance. And the more we pretend that it doesn't matter, the more we disadvantage the very people who are already deeply disadvantaged. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to ask if you could hand it to Russell, because I think you've laid down a really interesting challenge, and Russell's right in a situation there, particularly with that, picking up the theme of knowledge advantaging and disadvantaging others. Now, Russell, do you want to pick that up and
follow
work
that?
from there? Right?
Cheers, Pam. That was really awesome of you.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you. I'm going to locate my answers in Aotearoa, New Zealand, because that's the way I'm bent. So without any apology, I want to start with, in 2050, if you're educated, if we're educated, if our nation has educated people in it. Oh, and I want to say that I'm informed by a paper written by Wera Gardner in 1994 called Barbarians at the Gate, about the effect that Māori and Pasifika, if they don't have the equity and access you're talking about, will have if we don't address education, equity and access. That's an aside. I believe that to be educated in 2050 means that Te Tiriti o Waitangi will be an operational reality, not a matter of historic redress, because that's what it was designed to be, a matter of operational reality. And whenever you put it into operation with its principles of protection, participation and partnership, awesome things happen. So subsidiary to that, having an effective operational partnership with our elder treaty partner, we would then have effective partnerships with what will be an absolutely cosmopolitan nation, with pressure on borders and pressure on boundaries as that is occurring. You're seeing it on television now. We're going to have tons of very different people in our communities, and we are so fortunate that we're the only country in the world that has Te Tiriti, anything like it, that defines how we will work in partnership across people groups. And so I think that is the most remarkable foundation for education that we have, probably in this country. And then if we harness the gifts of those people, starting the gifts of Māori and Pasifika, and recognising what those are and what they can bring to the Commonwealth and to our economy and to their own mana and rangatiratanga, so that together we share that, I think that we have product and intelligence opportunities that we're only scratching at. There's a vast untapped pool of creative talent and ability and capacity that we can work with, not to harness it in a way where that's colonial, but in a way that is genuine in terms of outcomes that are not otherwise possible. You see it on the rugby field. You see what happens when you blend those skills with other types of skills that we have in our communities, and we're world beaters. We're a tiny little nation that can take on the world, and it's happening right now in real time. But we don't seem to think that way in commerce, and we don't seem to think that way in education either. And we don't bother to find out what are those gifts. So I agree with Pam. We've got to access, synthesize, transfer and monetize knowledge in 2050. I'm not sure that that's the knowledge that people are currently talking about most. I think that that's going to have to be visibly ethical, and I mean visible. So when John Hattie's talking about visible learning, I think that there's a whole area of learning missing that needs to be absolutely visible if we're going to be successful as an educated nation of citizens, and that is that there's a kind of ethic that will be visible because it's being taught at home and at school. And it will pertain to things like sustainability, ecological balance, because we don't have any of that really. In fact, the sectors that get criticised most, the agricultural sectors and the primary industry sectors, are striving towards an ecological balance more than the rest of us who criticise them, if you bother to find out. We need to be able to be a society that can make things without breaking things. Most of our creativity relies on us breaking things. Even at a molecular level, we break stuff to make stuff. And then we have a huge side effect problem. This gets back to the ethics of it all and the balance of it all. And we have a significant waste problem. So we live in a city now, Auckland, that's broke, absolutely broke, fundamentally broke, fiscally, And one of its huge problems is it can't deal with its waste. We've got a massive waste problem in the community that I live in. We actually can't get rid of it. And for people living in the homes in our community, they can't dispose of their waste. So unless we work together in school and attach the learning that we have, the knowledge that Pam was talking about, to these real world issues, we're stuffed. So I think being educated in 2050 would mean actually that we know what to do with our waste, among other things. Cheers.
Thanks, Russell. Marianne, Russell framed his response there in the context of Aotearoa, and so I'd like to come to you next and just hear what you have to say, perhaps with a perception a little broader than that.
Wow, and my brain's hurting, and I just love that idea of being able to make without breaking. I'm going to be thinking about that for a while. So, yeah, Pam, the idea of knowledge is really interesting, because that's the one thing that I'm looking at as I watch kids working in these informal spaces and what they teach me. And I have to go back to what Grant talked about yesterday. It's not 21st century. It's timeless. And that's what I'm looking at, is that sometimes we are so focused on what that institution of school is, or the narrative of education, that we forget that humans have been on, that there's a biological way that we learn. In fact, we often tend to disdain that in our formal learning spaces. So I think the technology, and I have to say this, I think access is a huge and important issue. Some of the things I'm going to talk about are looking at students who have had access, and I just want to be very respectful of that point, and that I'm just looking at one small sector, but I think that there's some clues about that can tell us why it is important for everybody to have access. I think it's the great equalizer. I think when you have access, you no longer have to be required to get that knowledge from the elite that own it. It's not in an ivory tower anymore. It's a bazaar, and it's messy, and it's there if you can find it. And I think Sugatra Mitra has showed us that with his work with the hole-in-the-wall computer, and what that taught us about kids having access, and that has been replicated with Negroponte. And his work has progressed with students. It's not about them just having access and being on their own, because they are extremely capable of learning, but it's about a partnership or being co-learners, because as adults, we bring the life literacy that they lack. And it's an interesting world, and I think the one thing for me that I see has changed is that with this access, for the first time in our history, we have things to learn from our students, from our children, that we've never really had to rely on before as human beings. Because you were always, as you progress through life, you were the child, you had those experiences, and you have always been the mentor and the giver of the wisdom and the giver of the knowledge in that context. But at the same time, kids are learning. So the interesting thing about my work is I've been doing a lot of work with virtual space and gaming, and there's a whole culture that is not let into school that is all around learning. And where there is no age level or grade level, but your proficiency level, and there are no constraints of the bell and the time. And these are the spaces that I've been in with my students, and I've been humbled by their ability to self-organize. They know who is good and who has the skills. So I don't believe that I think we're moving away from the age of the experts to the shared specialties and knowledge, and that can, one person holds many different skills, and the kids have a way of identifying that and leveraging that. And that is the thing that I'm interested in replicating in my own learning spaces, and not being the teacher anymore. I love the metaphor of the farmer, but I think it's also our job to inspire them, because they bring their passion, they bring a lot of ability to learn, but they also need that exposure to the great ideas, because we do have to ask the kids to think deeply about things, to solve the problems of waste, to solve the problems of equity. And so I think it's the dynamics that's changing more than the dynamics of how we think of education more than the learning, from where I'm sitting.
Thanks, Marianne. Which brings us to Barbara then. Barbara, you've looking into your own context. Share with us your ideas.
Well, it's interesting, look, when you look at 1950 and 2050, and I think what occurred to me is that some things stay the same, don't they? Being an educated person, a lot of things stay the same. And I guess one thing that has always driven me, and it still drives me insane, can I just say, is that, you know, we don't, how much do we really teach kids about being able to participate, particularly politically? And I've, you know, share what other people think, but I'd just like you to take you there for a minute. I had an experience a couple of weeks ago when our Maori and Pacific Council at school did a trip to Wellington, and they wanted to hear from all the Maori Pacifica MPs, who were very generous with their time, I might say, what was it that drove them? Why were they in politics, and what were their ideas? And so, and of course, they were incredibly persuasive, clever young people that they were being our kids were being talked at by. And when I came back, a young man called Matt, I said to him, what was the best bit? And he said, you know, he said, I sat with the Maori Party, it was Marama Fox, and everything she said, I agreed with. That, yeah, you did right. Yeah, and I could feel myself nodding. And then he said, we went to the National Party, and the National Party gave them lunch, and they sat in their caucus room or something, and he said, I agreed with everything they said. I was going, yeah, that's right, I totally get. And then we went to Labour. I thought, oh my God, that's me, you know. And then we went to the Green Party, and he said, and they had 5, and he said, well, I was coming back in the plane, and I thought, I agreed with every single one of them. So now, he said, I've got to discover who I am and what my values are and who I am. And I said to him, now, hold that thought, because I want you to be talking about that and thinking about that when we move forward next year. And I think, you know, to me, these are the things that we still have to do for kids. Like, and I think the pressure is different on kids now because everything's so quick and instantaneous. I think what's happened with the internet and information, the way kids can access info, I think it's amazing. I really do. I love seeing kids in class zip out their cell phones, blah, 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 and they've looked up something and they've got the answer. That's just cool. That is just the way, you know, how exciting is that? What a wonderful age that these kids live in. But then there's that extra bit is that, you know, our job is to take them away from that. Like, we've talked a lot at our school about taking a young person beyond the life that they lead. Like, how do we do that? Otherwise, what's the purpose? What's the point of us even being there? But I think, but that thing to me about being informed and being well-read and being, you know, like the reading I did before, you know, I envy people like that who can say, I read this and I know all the history of this and that. You know, we've got to kind of be there for kids as teachers in a way that really inspires them to be thoughtful and based on evidence. Right. I often say to kids, will say, you know, have an opinion about something, and I go, so where did you get that opinion from? Tell me about that. Has someone else got a different opinion from you? And those things are really important, and I think more important because of this flash, instant information that kids get. But also, they're living now in a global world that we're not. I mean, I grew up in a little town called Ohaupo. It was close to Te Awamutu. Te Awamutu was a big town. And, you know, everyone was the same as us, actually. And it's not like that for anybody in New Zealand anymore. You know, we've got 60, 70 different cultures. Kids are going to have a kind of cultural literacy that we didn't even dream of. Like, we didn't need it. It didn't occur to us. We were the rulers of the world, or the rulers of the world that we lived in. But that's not going to be the same. And in a democracy, it's not going to be the same. I wonder in 30 years who will be in Parliament. And it's exciting, but we've got to make sure that our kids are ready for that. The other thing, I was listening on YouTube, because I watch YouTube as well as read books, but a guy talking about scientific literacy and thinking to myself, well, that's actually going to be hugely important too for the saving of our planet. You know, just like you're talking about with all those sorts of things. I think we've kind of let science go a little bit in schools, and I think that's got to really, really change. And we've got to teach science in a way that is, in a way that means that kids can see it's a way of solving things. But it's got to start from a scientific base. You know, that whole thing that we kind of think that things are just going to happen or we live in a bubble. No, there's science behind this. And science has to be, there has to be a sort of a heightened awareness of that. Because if they don't, the planet will just disappear. I suspect in 1950, if we'd thought about scientific literacy, we maybe wouldn't be in the situation we're in anyway, but that's something else again. But the other big thing, you know, I love that expression that Helen Timperley uses in her books about adaptive expertise, and I think that that's one of the things that we're going to have to really think about with the kids is like we don't know what's going to happen. You know, in 30 years' time, we were just saying, oh, look, how do we know what's going to happen? We don't, because if you think 30 years back, things have changed since then, exponentially. You know, like you've got all those graphs that show how much change there's been. So our kids need to be adaptive, and they need to be in schools like experiencing change, and you know, not being too bothered about if they fail at this or fail at that, because actually that's just a way of learning and getting through things and being able to collaborate with each other and support each other on all of that. So I think there's some things there. But the thing I want to end up with is that I think one of the things is that we computers can do just about anything now. That's what is kind of interesting. And I think that, you know, we have to be careful and think about how the educated person will be thinking. Because, you know, we want to make sure, above all of this, is that we remain, we hold on to the human qualities that are so cool, like having fun and being together and socialising. I get worried when I hear people say that schools won't exist anymore because you can be at home doing your stuff on your own. Who wants to do that? That's no fun. Schools can be together, bringing kids together, having fun, drama, whatever it is that they're doing, creating problems, solving problems together. We're human, we're social beings, and we need to be that. You know, and we need to be with each other and have empathy with each other and be kind to each other. Yep. I mean, we're all going to be old soon, and I don't want to be looked after by a computer. No, thank you. I want a human face coming in. And I think those things that we probably didn't have to even think about in 1950, I suspect we've got to think a bit more about them now. Kia ora.
Oh, thank you, Tanya. And we could just about stop there and just reflect on that. But I think that the introductions that you've given have laid some really big issues ahead. From the framing, Pam, that you did about knowledge at the centre of it and dispelling a lot of the other stuff that distracts us, and the nature of our engagement with that, leading to the themes that all of you have reinforced. I just jotted down a few words as we were going through that I heard kind of being reiterated from you, that notion of equity, societal equity being a really important thing, and the social emancipation that can come as a result of that, the themes of citizenship, and underpinning that actually there are those rights, responsibilities that we all carry, and that requires us to have a sense of who we are, a sense of our purpose, a sense of values, and a sense of perspective on the planet, are all things that, as each of you have said, actually aren't any, those things haven't changed, those requirements haven't changed, but perhaps the requirement for them to be emphasised may. The cultural literacy you raised, Barbara, I think is a really important one, particularly for us here in Aotearoa, but globally that's going to be something that we need to take on board. And each of you in your own way have also emphasised the fact that we're part of a global community now, not isolated, and that was emphasised in the way we thought about ecology and the responsibility we have for the planet. So these are big ideas. These are really big issues. They have implications that are far different from perhaps what was thought about when schools and schooling were first envisaged as a way of taking those in the agrarian society and preparing them for an industrial workforce and so forth. So that segues nicely, I think, into a time where I've briefed the panel for a more open and informal discussion of say, this is the so what. You know, what if these are the issues, if these are the things that we believe are important, and what it means to be educated, then what as teachers in our school system, maybe about the structure of our system, of our schools, of what happens and so what. So I'm going to come back to our, just at this stage from New Zealand, and start perhaps over with you, Russell, just to start that. But look, I don't want it to be around the traps again. I'd like you to be able to just bounce off and just give me a signal, you're next, and see if we can get this going as a conversation in this next part. So what, Russell?
I don't think you can talk about so what until you've talked about what the drivers for change actually are, and that was one of your questions that you sent to us.
It was.
What are the drivers for change? And like all the other speakers, I don't think they're technological except for one. So I think population pressure is going to be an enormous thing for us. I think the pressure on traditional borders and boundaries is going to be huge. The fluidity of a connected society that's less located is the one thing that's technologically driven, most technologically driven, and I'll explain that. You're all educators, so you may not have thought about it this way, but the children in your schools that are the hardest to help are the unlocated kids. They're kids from families who don't actually stay in one place. They move around all the time, and the kids move around from home to home, and they don't have a structured set of routines that they live inside of. And so that's going to be an enormous challenge for us in school in the future is unlocated children, because although you can connect with these people electronically, you actually need to connect with them physically to give the social service provision and help that people require to engage with citizenship and grow as young people. So unlocated people are tricky, and that's a challenge that we're going to face, and we need to start thinking about it now. How do we deal with it? I think the fourth big driver, and the two things that are related, and some countries are positioning themselves now in respect to these drivers, are healthy land and healthy food and water. They're going to be massive issues. So in terms of what we should be doing about those drivers educationally, I'm a very practical person, and my quest for equity and access for people that I live and work amongst has always been very practical. And I agree with all the other speakers that equity of access is paramount. But then after that, I think that there's a whole lot of tripe talked about how we should direct education. So if we think about ourselves as citizens of Aotearoa and think about the dirt that we live on, and so people talk a whole lot of stuff about STEM subjects, but I don't see a whole lot of application of those STEM subjects to agri-tech, food tech, horticulture, be the saving of our nation, because the gifts are already here in our nation. We're good at them. But what I see and hear is the media bagging those businesses, bagging Fonterra, bagging Zespri, bagging the things that actually produce our foreign exchange, bring money into our country and make us successful, when we live in a place that's clean and we could make it cleaner and we could feed the world. And it's important because people are going to need feeding. We're going to need feeding. And so there's a whole lot of natural things that we could be doing to make our place better, cleaner, nicer, and we could absolutely target our education at an ecologically balanced future, so that the sciences and the maths and the social sciences that we're investigating drivers in the world.
Starts off well. I can see Barbara's keen to go next.
just one of the things that I'd like to follow up on too, like bringing that back in now, like what you're saying, and agree with all of that, obviously. But bring it back, the thing that I struggle with in schools still, and the thing that we have actually, it has been a driver for us in setting up the new school, is, we've got to flip schools on their heads. The schools are still very, very much engaged. We're doing it because we've kind of got no choice, because that's the way the system's run. But we've got to challenge the system. We're still involved in sorting kids. I agree that the strengths and gifts are already there, but they can kids can get done to in schools. And I want to bring it back into what we do to kids in schools. And I love, there's a book called Leadership Mindsets by Linda Kaiser and Judy Halbert. And they talk about, you know, if you're going to lead a school, then you need to be to flip your way of thinking from sorting kids out. You know, I've got to sort them. Who's first and who's at the bottom, you know, and setting out a class. This is the gifted class. This is the, you know, we think those things are old-fashioned. In your schools, then have a look at it and think, is this helpful for anybody? Is this going to make educated people, or are we just going to have more of the same? You know, if you honestly believe that having, no, this is not a big thing about streaming, but you know, the damage that we do to kids is almost impossible to undo. The damage. Really believe it. We've got a saying at school, it's not if you're bright, it's how you're bright. And I can tell you, teenage kids love that. It's like, yeah, you know, because you know what they're like. The one thing about teenagers, they want justice in the world and think it's fair. And it's a very powerful statement. But they will talk passionately themselves about how they were in the like. But if you've got a bottom stream, those kids are going to think they're dumb forever. And those are the kids that you're talking about. That's the inequalities that we're talking. We've got all this research that says that about growth mindsets and God knows what else, but we do nothing about it. We do nothing about it. We don't go back to our schools and think, oh my God, we better change what we're doing here. These traditions are destructive of our kids. The traditions that we hold dear. Oh, but this is right. This is the way we've always done it. Oh, my goodness. They're actually wrong. And so we've got to be thinking about how we build an education or a school for every kid that comes into it. And I think we're a long way away from doing that. I think it matters.
Marianne wants to riff off that.
Yeah. Yeah, we do a lot of damage. And Russell, you said you hated school. I did too. So I thought it was a great irony that I became a teacher. And I guess that is probably why I am so disrespectful of the system, because it didn't work for me, and yet it did. I got an education, but at a great cost. I didn't know I was dyslexic until I was hired to teach dyslexics. And I was like, oh. And school is designed for a very narrow set of skills and values, and we live in a time that's going to need all hands on deck. And so how do you blow up that structure? How do you make it without breaking it? Love that. We don't have students on this panel.
We don't.
We do not have students on this panel, and I am stunned time and time again how we do not bring them into this conversation. And that is my small contribution, is go back and bring your students into the conversation. They are really smart. They will have answers and visions and understanding that we lack, and that is the co-learning part. It's the co-partnership that has to shift. I don't know how to fix it. All I have is my own experience. I recently talked to a young teacher candidate, and I asked, what are your hopes, dreams, worries about being a teacher? And he said, I have such limited scope, and my students know so much more than I do. I worry that I don't want to constrain them. And I think that we have to start shifting and looking and bringing our partners into this conversation.
Who's next?
I guess that just leads me to be thinking, one of the things that our students have on a Wednesday, they design their own projects. And we're a senior school, year 11, 12 and 13, and they have this whole day to design the projects. And one of the things, if people say to me now, you know, what is it? What is 21st century education? You know, I'm thinking that it's where I think we're obliged now, because of the access that kids have which we never ever had, I think we're obliged to give kids opportunities or a space somewhere in the week where they're not limited by the teacher, as you were saying, where they don't have those limits, and where they're not constricted and constrained by the curriculum or the assessment. And there's no, we've lost that sort of hierarchy thing about how you've got to wait for a certain time before you can do something. And we've got kids making applications and turning businesses around and being advertising gurus for this one. The kids are capable, at 16, 17, 18, and setting up their own businesses and all of that. And I think we've got to sort of kind of admit that and go with that, that there is... some of our kids are sitting there and they've got mentors in the States, teaching them how to do stuff. And it's kind of beyond me, and certainly beyond any of the teachers in the school, any of them. So we can't, because of the way the world is, I don't think we can anymore just have them sitting in front in a class and limiting them like that. Yeah.
I think in response to that, it's interesting that cars are parked for much longer than they're ever driven. And schools are closed for much longer than they're ever open. And if students need this sort of open space to do their research, to connect with people overseas, etc., if it's the space they need, then schools should be open 24/7. And they should be able to access those spaces. And they don't need a highly paid professional teaching workforce to sit and watch or facilitate on the side or learn with them. In fact, we should be paying to learn from them, if that's what it's going to be about. So that we really just need people to make sure the place is safe while they're exploring and connecting and learning. And that the school time day could be organized completely differently. In fact, it doesn't absolutely have to be in a school building, though we have all these structures built. So it's a shame to just, whatever them. So why don't we open the place right up and have discrete moments where a highly professional workforce can actually do deliberate acts of teaching and use their professionalism and their expertise and be paid for it to work with students, and then have other times and places available for the other learning to happen as well. Because you learn, it's not like we've got this idea you learn through school, but you also learn through common sense and being alive. And we have different access to that. Some kids don't get good access to either ways of learning. So opening up everything might be one solution. The other way is just to get rid of school and explode school and allow different hubs located throughout cities. And there are schools, if you like, inverted commas, based on this already. But allow places where if you want to pick up literacy at any time you like, if you pop in here, there will be someone who will work with you there. You want to look at science and what it is to understand agriculture, where you turn up here at the back of this library or this workshop or this shop. There'll be a hub where you can learn that. So we disaggregate schools totally. And teachers, if you like, for the kids who are traveling and unlocatable, we become itinerant as well. And so we're like gypsies with our little pack of useful stuff. We move from center to center, and we set up shop and we advertise in the Main Street. I'm going to run a lesson on geography. Anyone that wants to find out about, the crustal plates, I'll be doing it between 2 and 3. Bring something to contribute, a gold coin. So we disaggregate everything. And I don't think that's far-fetched. I think it's happening in some places already. It's just we're a bit tied into school as a place. But I don't think we should limit ourselves to the school day when we're talking.
Thanks, Pam. Russell wants to reply.
May I say something about school? I agree with you all that school, in many senses, is dated. School is a complex set of technologies, or education as we understand it, is a complex set of technologies. And what for us, it is remarkably successful. It is far more successful than the public or the media say when they're bagging school, it's approximately somehow or other sort of 80% successful or more. If you think about what it does compared with what it was designed to do originally. However, what you've got to know is that for a whole people group right around the world, school is horrible. And they're not all brown, they're all kinds of people. It just so happens that more of them are found between the tropics of Capricorn and Cancer, but globally. But there's a whole bunch of people for whom school's awful, and it always has been, because it was made by people of my worldview heritage for people of my worldview heritage, and whether I liked it or not, it actually worked. I detested it, and it worked. That's really interesting in itself. So we have to retool school, remodel school, redesign school, explode school, do something to school. That's imperative. School as it is basically going to be a goner. It isn't going to work. However, politically we have an issue in that governments love the compulsory sector because they can locate resource into it and direct how that resource is used. And Western governments are placing more and more and more, or developed world governments, are placing huge dependence on education to rescue their nations, because basically they're all in trouble. So you're feeling more and more downward pressure, that's political, coming onto you because governments actually acknowledge, in the developed world in particular, that we are the solution because they have a massive problem, and they know they have a problem. It's economic, it's social, it's all kinds of stuff. And it's the growing of that 20%. So what I want to say about the global education reform movement, and I think this is really important, is that our federations and our teacher unions get themselves into oppositional corners and argue ideologically, and we've got to stop doing it. What we've got to do is have evidence-based arguments, because it's ideological. And if we would just have evidence-based conversations with people in power, it could change everything. And some of the things that we're talking about that have solid evidence behind them and are producing results then become conversations rather than oppositional arguments where nobody goes anywhere and we all sit in our corners.
Look, I'm going to give the panel a chance to breathe for a moment, because it set the scene really well, and I could segue some questions back and forth. I'm sensing there'll be some questions amongst our audience. This is the part that gets quite awkward to manage, because we've got some microphones up here and we've got to get them round because we are doing so. I've got Tara down the back, going to, if you don't mind, come and get one of the microphones from up on the stage, and if you could just signal that you've got a question, Tara will bring it to you, and then we'll make do with one of the questions here, one of the mics here. So can we just, is there someone who would like to start? Here we are. Or one here for Tara, and then we'll go over to you. If you don't mind just introducing yourself and where you're from to start with, and then ask your
I'm
question.
Nick from Kohimarama School in Auckland. Just wanted to ask the question, or get your view on, do you think as a society we've got to look in New Zealand at our whole value system? Because what I've just noticed is this ridiculous flag debate is just once again showing that, you know, we like to shove all those major issues that we have in our country under the carpet, and as soon as we come up with that flag debate issue, the whole country gets behind it. We want to spend millions on it, and you've never heard the country so animated in media and people about a bloody flag. And yet when it comes to all the other things that we need to take care of, they just get parked to the left. You know, all the stuff that goes on in our communities. And do you see a role in schools with our students to really bring some of those things back to the forefront? I mean, I'd love to think that no school's talking about the flag, because, you know, when it comes to other things, it's irrelevant. You know, people might disagree with that, but do you think we really need to look at what we actually value and make that a start point for our schools as well?
Nick, I totally agree. When I first started teaching, it was a long time ago, and I taught at Epsom Girls Grammar School. I think I've been away long enough to be safe enough to talk about it, so that most of the people have shifted. And I waited for them to talk about learning, and they didn't. People sat in staff meetings, and it just droned on and on and on, and no one was animated, and people tried to escape. It was purgatory. It was tea time, and, you know, tea time and the gods and the death and the cold. It was an appalling time. And then something happened. They redid the kitchen. You would not believe the degree of animation there was about the color of the Formica tops, and whether we should have the milk in jugs with little things on the side. People brought in samples. I've never seen a more energized group. And I see the same thing in schools. I think the thing we should recognize at the moment is we're in the grips of an incredibly consumerist society with consumer ethics, and we are just driving things. So I'll go to a school and they'll be enormously excited because they're doing sustainability, and they have bought a worm farm and they are waiting for the package to arrive like cargo cult, and then they unwrap it and they make it according to the instructions. They've purchased a worm farm, right? That's very, very, very sad.
I'm scared of you now.
Yeah, absolutely. I bet you bought your worm farm.
Just donated.
It was, oh, even worse. Largesse from the patron. That's worse. You're corrupted on every level. The whole idea now, we've moved beside, like the consumerism started in the 50s. That late 50s is when we got credit cards and we changed the way we look at debt. And it's got worse and worse and worse until it's not consume and consume and consume. My friend on the right here was talking about having too much stuff and how do we get rid of our waste. That's sort of come from it. But now it's about discard. You know, what can we discard and replace? Discard and replace. This phone is not quite up to date. Let's discard it and get a new one. We're obsessed with that. We're obsessed with, there is a school in New Zealand, for example, that promotes itself as being a school that connects with the city. And it's located in the middle of the city, or was located in the middle of the city. And they set up a barista bar. And so their kids learnt how to be baristas in the school. I think you do the same.
I do that.
Yeah, he does the same. So the kids learn how to do something
I'm addicted, all right?
in the middle of the school. And I always think, how sad is that? That's a lost opportunity. Why would you want to bring the outside in and teach them how to do it? And in fact, why would you do coffee as a consumer product? It's the worst possible impact on the environment in terms of the water cost of processing the beans through, the clean water cost to community. So we don't look at the ethics of it. So we cry sustainability, we cry citizenship, then we personalize everything and purchase everything. So let's start with ourselves first. Let's sort ourselves first and then go fix someone else, you know. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another response to the ethics question, or okay? We'll come to you next. Yeah.
I'm from Whangarei Girls High School in the north. They've got better weather today than us. What I want to know is, with big organisations and big things like this, we all realise at this stage that management is an important issue. Where do you see management of this sort of education going in the future?
Who wants to take that one? Yeah, well, you don't? All right.
We should enjoy what we've got while we've got it.
Tara.
And I really mean that seriously. The fact that we have boards of trustees in this country and that they hire principals and staff is remarkable. We're the only country in the world with the degree of site-based management that we have. We should treasure it. We should try not to do things to force the government to scrap it and employ us all under the State Services Commission, because actually at the moment, in response to your question, your community of learners can decide what to do. As long as you stick with the NZC, which is a remarkably broad philosophical document, you can do all kinds of funky stuff. And I'm the beneficiary of that, and my community together, is that we've been able to reinvent ourselves. And we didn't even have to ask for permission. We just had to do it properly, do it well, be subject to ERO like everybody else is. But the good thing about the Education Review Officers, they're actually keen for us to do this. And so I've got to say, in support of ERO, they've been champions for us. They've given us effective critique. So let's just hope and pray it continues and we don't screw it all up. Because if enough of us get gnarly enough, what a government will do is they'll just put a line through it and then they'll rule the roost across all of our communities of schools, and we'll be screwed. At the moment, we've got remarkable freedom, more than anywhere else in the developed world.
Yeah. Did you want to make a comment on that, Marianne? From
No,
your?
I just
Yeah.
agree
Yeah.
I agree.
We've got a question over the back there then.
Hi, my name's Trevor Storr. In the broadest sense, hi there, Russell. In the broadest sense, what's the future of educational credentials?
The future of education credentials looks like a side to my right here. Let's pass the microphone here.
I don't know what they will be. I don't think what we have now will serve our students any longer, although they are really still tied into that. And that's where I see the disconnect, that there's this robust kind of learning that happens outside of school, and then they power down to do school, but they do it with so much deference. They believe us that this is going to matter. And when I went back last year after looking at your national curriculum and looked at the Common Core, the big difference was the Common Core is all set up, or our education system, to get kids into college, where I think you are addressing the whole child and your community and what that looks like. The problem with college is you have the narrative that you're going to go to college and get a job, but just as Pam said, there is no guarantee. What you are guaranteed is debt. And so this is cropping up a whole another layer of problems. So we're going to have to grapple and be the person who can get the job done. And I think we're going to have increasingly more interesting things happen as that piece of paper won't guarantee anything.
Barbara, I think you've got a response.
Yeah, there's some things that have happened at school that I've been surprised at, I guess, and didn't, we've got this impact project happening on a Wednesday where the kids don't work on the NCA stuff, they work on their own projects. And some things that have happened there have absolutely taken me by huge surprise and shock, really. And I a couple of years ago, he was going to be a doctor, and so he didn't want to do an impact project because, he wanted another subject or three, and he could easily do them all on that day and all the rest of it. But we actually said to him, actually, just get and do it. Like that's go to another school if you don't want to do it, etc., etc. So he decided, he was working in a surfing shop, which was reasonably popular, and they were making a reasonable amount of money. But it wasn't automated. The guy had sort of was pretty casual about everything. Everything was done on paper, which would have suited me, by the way. But Liam went in as a 16-year-old. He was working there, and he convinced them to allow him to completely automate that shop. He put up a website. He changed all the way payments were made, and eventually they spent $20,000 on him doing this work, and they regularly to the kids. He comes back now. He then, what amazed me was that he did that at 16 and was able to do it at 16 and to do it extraordinarily well. And that business is making, millions of times more money than it ever did before. And he then went to university for a year, and what was interesting for him, and he comes back and tells the kids, look, make sure that you do this stuff, because when you go to university, he always had prior knowledge to work on. So he came first in the Massey University course, and now he's going to do, he's this year setting up a business, and then he's going to go back and do some more university work. But you see, that would never have happened at schools that I've been at before, and it was just having that opportunity. So the credentialing thing didn't matter for that business. I don't know whether that answers that thing, but it's become more and more to my attention that when kids have the potential to do things, they do them, and people allow them to do them without the credentialing at all. And I don't know whether that answers your question, but it's just something that...
I just have to add, we don't know what the jobs are going to be. So how do you credential for those jobs? A lot of those jobs are going to be pop up and created, hopefully not by things being broken, and making new pathways. And so...
I'd like to disagree with my colleagues on the left. I think that credentialing will grow and grow and grow. At the moment, you're not allowed to have 2 dogs without having a certificate, right? You're not allowed to pump mashed potato in Kentucky Fried Chicken without having passed the hygiene certificate with the gloves on. You're not allowed to do anything. You can't move. I'm waiting for the time where we're wanting to credential 90-year-olds to use macrame needles. It's not that far off. Everyone wants a certificate. And you go anywhere and we've suckered people into being wanting a certificate, wanting a ceremony, wanting to put a hat on, a grad ceremony. That whole ritual of it we embrace wholeheartedly. But if you could find a way where we didn't have to sit through it in schools at end-of-year assemblies, that would be really heartening.
Thanks. Question up here.
Oh, what she said.
Well,
So you talked about waste, about what to do with the waste. You've talked about sustainability. You've also talked about culture and helping kids build that culture in terms of elections. And then you've also talked about knowledge, about what is advantageous knowledge to know. So what I'd like to know is, how do we decide what is advantageous knowledge to know, given that, well, we've got these huge problems to deal with in our society. We've got knowledge expanding at an exponential rate. And then on top of that, our old ways of thinking about knowledge, of knowing about science, knowing about tectonic plates, is what got us into this mess in the first place, where we're going to run out of fish in my lifetime. And we've got climate change, we've got all these huge things going on. So how do we decide what's advantageous?
It's actually reminding me of my kids who always tell me that we created all the problems that they're having to deal with. So I had this sort of flashback. But yeah, no, like there's some flaws in the logic, but in terms of causality of things. But it's driven, if you say advantage, it depends what you mean by advantage. It's so much, if you're acquiring wealth, if it's a consumer society, it's all about acquiring wealth. Barbara's example of the young man who succeeded, he was succeeded in helping a group acquire wealth, and then he's setting up a business where he wants to acquire wealth for himself. So it's a consumer ethic. It's like the maker culture, and when we say this is where we ought to be going, we ought to be making and creating more stuff, even though we already have too much stuff. Then we're forgetting about the other sort of professions where you're not creating stuff. We're privileging making stuff over caring for people or teaching people or making a difference in someone else's life. And I think that whole sense of what is advantaged, you can lead a very empty life if you pursue what someone else decides is the advantage. And that we ought to be encouraging kids to think about who they are, where they belong, and what they want for their future, and if they pursue that, they will truly be advantaged.
So
I think there's some heritage answers to that, fortunately for us, and once again we live in a blessed country. If you think about Maui Tiki Tiki Taranga, combining ancient wisdom with new technology, the new technology being a waka haurua, the ancient wisdom being Manaia Kalani, the star line in the sky that took a marginalised individual and his people to a land of new hope somewhere around AD 1 or sometime soon after that. And think about the ancient wisdoms that are in our whakapapa, whatever colour we are, whether we're white, brown, brindle or black, that there are ancient wisdoms and spirituality that have our belief sets and structures that our ethics sit upon, that are about things like Pam was talking about, caring for people, being nice, being kind. What does a citizen mean? What does it mean to be a citizen? And the more that we unpack those things and don't lose sight of our heritage, don't lose sight of who carried me, what's my family name, where did I come from, and what do those people believe? What did they think was important? Because most of those things haven't changed. So they're the reference or the compass that we use for, just because we can, should we? Because that's really behind a lot of your concern, is Because we can, should we? Because the technologies that are growing out of the knowledge set that's expanding provide opportunities for action. And we need the ethics to sit behind those and around them as frameworks. And if our children are not being educated into a real ethical position about what it means to be a citizen, the rights and responsibilities that go with that, and understanding where we came from and what all of our ancestors held dear, well, we're going to screw ourselves up. But if we keep educating children and talking about those things all the time, and keep talking, keeping kids connected to their grandparents. Kids who are connected to their grandparents know where they came from.
And that's, I guess, where I disagree somewhat with, about schools disappearing altogether. That's what schools need to be for. And that's what schools are for, I believe, is that connection with the past. And, I think that's, if you talk about the wisdom from the past, we've got to make sure that our kids have it, because that's what will be an educated person in 2050, someone who knows who they are. It's that young Maori man saying, in our school saying, well, who am I? I don't even know who I am. So how do we encourage and support him to find who he is? And it's that kind of thing of always going back to the past so that we can actually live in the present, feeling confident about who we are, whoever we are. And I agree with that. But there is wisdom in the past. And I want schools to stay as schools, and I want teachers to be teachers, because that's what I want them to talk about and be with. And I want them to learn how to do that well, how to actually support every kid who comes into the school to be who they are in a really strong, this is my unique gift in the world, and I'm here and I'm allowed, not am I allowed to be here, the world is privileged to have me here. That's what I want every kid from our school to feel when they leave. But they need a school to do that. Otherwise, we've got some kids being hugely advantaged and some not. I want the school to take the kids down that path, and then to take them to lives that they didn't even think about or dream of. That's, to me, what school should be.
Yeah, and I'll just throw in my perspective, my American perspective. And yeah, I think that piece is important. And I love, Pam, that you talked about schools being open 24/7, because I think you do need a physical space for communities to come together and have a touchstone. In the American schools, we are still extremely content driven. And I think that's a problem in the age of information. I think that is the one thing that is attracting me most to New Zealand, is that you are holding on to that view of your community and the whole person and the whole community. And that is obvious in your national curriculum. It's obvious in what I've observed. And I'm glad to hear on the panel that you identify that as being really central to whatever vision or whatever path you find forward, not to lose sight of that.
Thank you. We've got one more?
I'll just see if there's anything on Twitter.
Okay, there's one person over on the right there that's got their hand
Any
up.
questions on Twitter? No?
Okay.
Hi, I'm from Gore. I'm from St. Peter's down there. I've got a couple of kind of questions. In this period of change, how can we make schools for every child when we're driven by national standards and qualifications, Like, how can you tell kids that they're valued for what they're good at when we're controlled by the government and what they think is worth doing? The other thing too, like, what do you think about conferences like this, where we're talking about how we need to teach students to think about waste, to have social conscience, and all of that kind of thing, be citizens, when a thing like this costs probably, I don't know how many millions of dollars for us all to be here. And in Gore, we don't have homeless people on the street. There's poverty for sure. But what happens to the food at the end of all of our sessions, like, how do you guys feel about that?
Good questions. Who wants to pick that up on the panel? There were two there. Yeah.
I agree with the whole national standards debate and things that go with that. But you know what? I think that's the job I think if you're a leader in a school, that's your job. You don't get driven by national standards. I'm horrified by the stories that I hear about national standards. And I'll just tell you my advice to a young teacher at our school. She's got twins, and one of them is a kid who finds it hard to learn and hard to settle, and he's a runner, one of those kids. The little girl, on the other hand, looks after him and is always caring for him. Now, she gets a report home that says they're both below the national standard. It's on the front thing. And she was in tears, this woman. She said, my kids are just wonderful, and they do their best. They kind of look, and I said to her, stop. This nonsense has got to stop. I said, number one, go and talk to the school. But on the other hand, you write your own report for these kids. Now, she did. She went home. Her husband's a media designer. He designed the report because these kids are a bit old. They're about 10 and they're pretty smart, and they would have. So he designed a new report, and it said on the report, and I've asked Christina if I can tell the story at times, and they wrote, Allegra is a wonderful little girl. She looks after her brother. Her parents are so proud of her. The school says that she is working really. It went on and on and on. Do you know, that kid loves school now. Absolutely loves it. With a little boy, they did the same. And I was speaking to a young man recently from Ngarawahia, and he's been visiting our school. He's setting up his own school, and again with twins. And I told him the same story. He said, right, I'm going straight back, and I'm going to write, and I'm going to read it out to the school, a report for my own son. Now, you see, what I'm thinking about that is that we're in schools. We've got control of that. We don't have to buy into that. These national standards need to be discreet. It's not for the kid to see, I'm below the national standard, I'm below, I'm below, I'm below. There's a story of one of our DPs whose daughter, when she goes into the classroom, is at the bottom of both groups because that's where she is placed. Now, this is a girl of 11 and she's at the bottom. Now, who tells that to a kid? That's morally wrong, and it's morally, there's something wrong with that. And the only people responsible are you guys. We're all in it, and we don't have to play that game. We play it differently. I believe that's our job. Just coming back to the conference idea, I think, I agree with it, but I do think money well spent is getting people to come together, and it's like what I feel about schools. I think as human beings, we need to get together and talk and argue, and I think it's always money well spent.
Russell, one last comment.
Yeah. National standards thing, whether you display it or don't display it, what Barbara said is right. We're in charge in the classroom. We're in charge in the school, and the way we make people feel is entirely up to us, and nobody should have to suffer because of it. Our job is to get the stats and the data out to where it's got to go, meet our legal obligations, but why should anyone feel stink about it?
Thank you. Did you have something to add? No, look, we're just at that point of time where it's about time to wrap up, and this has been a wonderful time. I'm going to ask the panel, though, that they weren't prepared for this, but I think it's a worthwhile thing just for a one sentence from each of you to respond to that question based on what we've talked about. What does it mean to be educated? If there's that final thought you'd like to leave with us, and I'll let you think about that just as you're doing it. I'll come around. But I think while I'm thinking, just want to reflect on Jane Gilbert at the beginning of the Permission to Play panel made a comment that I thought has helped frame a lot of things for me just for this conference even. When she was talking, a lot of discussion has been had about collaboration being an essential part of what we need to explore and understand in the world that we're moving into. Moving away from the silos, moving away from the privatised practice, moving away from these things, we have to understand how to get on with each other. It's effectively what Russell's talking about in terms of citizenship. And I think, though the point that she made was, as teachers, as educators, we're really good at locking ourselves in the room and being very convivial. And we think of that as collaboration. We pat each other on the back, we stroke each other's egos, and we agree with each other, and we're too afraid often to say the things that perhaps will throw something in the midst and cause pain. But the point she made, and several others have made it through the conference, that actually real collaboration is going to involve conflict. It's going to involve putting ideas on the table that conflict with other people's ideas and batting it around and being prepared to stand back a bit and see what emerges from that discussion as being much greater than the sum of the individual contributions. And so I'm telling that because I think I'm really appreciative of the panel today for stepping up in that way and being able to put things out there that probably have caused ideas in your own minds to go, oh, do I agree with that, don't I? And you've seen, even on the panel, they've been prepared to toss things out and agree and disagree with each other. So for that's a preemptive thanks to the panel, I think, for achieving what I'd hoped might come out of that. So I'm going to turn it back to them for their opportunity to have the right of reply. What does it mean to be educated in the middle of the 21st century? You're holding the mic, would you like to
I
start?
have to start because I'm holding the mic.
Yeah.
I think it means to be educated is to be a citizen, to belong, to know that you matter to others, and to know that you can make a difference for others in turn. And I think that would sum it up really well. So I think that in schools we should not be focused so much on the right of the individual and personalization, and we should be looking much more carefully at how we encourage collaboration and working together. And I'm reminded, if I can defer to computer gaming, because I never had a chance to have a go at you, Marianne, which I wanted to. But in computer gaming, one of the arguments, no, I'm not going, one of the arguments was that in a computer game, you're in a guild or you're in a group and you're going for some joint target. It's like citizenship, working together for some outcome, and you stick together. And how different would schools be if, when you were put in a class at the beginning, you had to stick with that group of kids all the way through? And so your success or your failure would be based on the outcomes of that group of kids and where they went on in life. And you would learn very quickly that if someone was struggling in your class, you would want to help them, because your success depended on their success as well. And if we had that sort of mindset, I think that my success is nothing unless I'm using it in the service of others, and I can scoop other people up.
Take on.
Beyond rangatiratanga, maramatanga, citizenship that's fully enfranchised.
I think that a well-educated person is always someone who is well-read and well-versed in the wisdom of the past, and able to make decisions, has that kind of cultural sensitivity, cultural awareness of that your view is just one view, that there are other views that are equally valid, and that you're able to kind of consider with empathy the views of others as you go forward, as you're making decisions to go forward.
Wow, I concur completely with all of you, and thank you, Pam. You said better for me what I couldn't say for myself, but I would just add that it is going to be a constant to be open and inquisitive and agile and adaptive, because we're in for a really interesting ride.
Thank you. Well, look, I want to thank each of you. Russell, the breadth of experience you've brought and the experience from Point England School and having a long friendship with you and knowing what sits behind that, you've brought that to the fore. Pam, I seem to work in lots of schools where you've been in and know the profound difference that you make in those schools with that focus on thinking and empowering young people to think in the way that you described to start with. Barbara, it was a privilege working with you as the school got on its feet and watching over 8 years the way things have worked. There's substance behind the views that you've shared here today. And Marianne, it's a much more recent contribution, but I have to call to mind my son, who's been editing all the videos that were made. He came home, we were in the room the other day excitedly telling me about an Ed Talks that he was videoing about this older person talking about Minecraft and really understanding what it was and how it would work. I said, oh, what was that person's name? Oh, I think it was somebody Malmstrom, he says. You've established a good reputation there. Look, there's so much wisdom on the stage, but there's even more sitting out there collectively here. And I think the point well made by speakers at the end, it's about us. It's about we, not me. And we, if we're going to do anything moving from this conference, need to be able to keep these conversations ticking along and to not just say, oh, that was a nice panel, but actually say, what is it going to mean for me when I go back to my school? Can you please join with me in thanking the 4 people up here? Excellent. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, what's left of it. Thank you. Oh, so just before you leave, a thing on my note. There is a wall, a glass wall outside there that has a big heading on it, what it means to be educated in the middle of the 21st century. And down here, my lovely assistant, Joe, is holding the pens that you can use to write on that wall, all right, if you're still in the analogue world. Thank you. That was.